morning, everybody. Hi, welcome. And good morning to everyone who's with us online. I am very excited about today's shiur. The hardest thing about this was stopping myself from reading throughout the entire night for the last two nights and just limiting this to what I think we can safely do in 1 hour with the hint that we'll probably come back to this text or this character in the future. So first, I want us to invite us to begin with the bracha, with the blessing for immersing ourselves in the study of Torah. La'asok b'divrei Torah, baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. Okay. So I have been circling around the Beruria incident and the Beruria story for this entire year, waiting for the perfect moment when we could bring her into our collective discourse. Some of you have heard Beruria's name, and some of you have studied her story. Some of you have never heard her name before, and some of you may have gone to a school named after her. So we're going to start from the beginning. And you'll see, I think we'll have a sense as we go through this of why I felt that this moment was a particularly critical moment to lift up this name and the story. So I'm just going to take us for a moment into Kiddushin. There were a number of starting texts that we could have chosen from, but this one we're going to connect back to later. So we'll start with Kiddushin, which is talking about a ruling that a man is not allowed to be in a room alone with two women, but a woman can be secluded in a room with two men. And the school of Eliyahu teaches, this is from Kiddushin 18a-b, that the reason why is because women are of light mind and they're more easily seduced. It says, Ho'il v'nashim datan kalot alehen, that they are lightheaded and therefore might be tempted to have sex with the men if they were in the room with the men. And then the Gemara asks, from where are these matters that it's prohibited for a man to be secluded with women derived? Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Rabbi Yishmael, from where is there an allusion from the Torah, the prohibition against seclusion? And then brings a pasuk from Deuteronomy, a verse from Deuteronomy, as it is stated, concerning one who incites others to idolatrous worship. If your brother, the son of your mother, entices you, from Deuteronomy 13, therefore indicating that women are seductresses and also susceptible to seduction. And so this is just a principle put forth in Masechet Kiddushin, an indication about women that they can't be fully trusted. There is similarly a text in Masechet Sota, which I didn't include on the source sheet, but which I will just briefly share with you from Masechet Sota 20a, which famously talks of the ordeal in which a woman is suspected of adultery by her husband because she has been secluded with another man, and she has to drink this bitter water, which is has dissolved ink from a sacred scroll, and when she drinks it, it's either going to miraculously prove that she's innocent or she's going to die in a horrific way. Her belly will swell, her thighs will rupture. It's quite grotesque. And here the rabbis say that there are some things that a woman could do to temporarily delay the onset of those horrific results of the bitter water. And one of the things is that if she is knowledgeable in Torah, and then she's accused of adultery, then maybe it will take a year for her belly to swell and her thighs to explode, or maybe even 2 years, or maybe even 3 years, which prompts Rabbi Eliezer to say that anyone who teaches his daughter Torah is teaching her tiflut, which is sex. He's teaching her licentiousness. He's teaching her how to basically be a prostitute. So this is the rabbinic framework. This is, by the way, not biblical law. It's also not rabbinic law, it's folklore. It is the way that the rabbis told the story about women and sex and Torah study. And it was definitely not taken as a precedent for rabbinic law. Nevertheless, we're going to see how this idea that women should not be able to learn Torah or become teachers of Torah rose in prominence and became increasingly normative because of the prominence of this idea that women are fundamentally lightheaded and easily seduced. And there's one particular story that's going to drive this narrative home for us. But that said, it's quite a complicated story. Not the story itself, but the way that the story is then read. So that's where we're going today. And I will now turn us to the character of Beruria. If you look in Psachim 62b, the text number 2 on our sheet, we have the story of a rabbi named Simlai who came before our beloved Rabbi Yochanan and said to him, I would love for you to teach me the book of genealogies. This, by the way, the book of genealogies, nobody knows exactly what it is. It seems like it's a kind of strange commentary to the book of Chronicles, but some people say it's a kind of lost artifact of the Jewish people. But anyway, Rabbi Simlai is desperate to learn it, and apparently Rabbi Yochanan knows it. And he says to him, will you teach me the book? And Rabbi Yochanan answers with a kind of an offensive question, which is, where are you from? And Rabbi Simlai says, Lod, which, by the way, I saw Eitan, where'd you go? Just came in, who has been working in Lod. This is the neighborhood where the airport is, Ben Gurion Airport, outside of Tel Aviv, which used to be Lida and now Lod. And so he says he's from Lod. And then Rabbi Yochanan asks, well, where do you live now? And he says, Nehardea. And Rabbi Yochanan says, well, you're out of luck because I won't teach anyone from Lod, and I'm not going to teach anyone who lives in Nehardea. So I can't teach you this book. And Rabbi Simlai says, well, that's not good enough for me. I really, really want to learn this random book of genealogies. And he keeps pressuring him. And then he says, teach it to me in 3 months. And Rabbi Yochanan takes a pile of dirt and throws it at him and says the following, Beruria, the wife of Rabbi Meir, the daughter of Rabbi Hanania ben Tradion, was so sharp, was so smart, had such a good memory, she learned 300 halachot, 300 laws in one day from 300 different sages, and nevertheless, she couldn't learn the book of genealogy in 3 years because it's that hard. And you say I should teach it to you in 3 months? So this is in Masechet Psachim, this kind of throwaway reference to a woman, the wife of the brilliant sage Rabbi Meir, the daughter of the brilliant sage Rabbi Hanania ben Tradion, who herself was so brilliant and so sharp that she could actually learn 300 halachot from 300 different teachers. Because sometimes you can learn from one teacher, but do you have the mental acuity and capacity to actually learn from all different kinds of teachers? And even she couldn't do this. So Simlai, who do you think you are that you should have the capacity to actually learn this? So I want to take a moment and just consider together how exceptional they are saying that Beruria is. Because she's exceptional not only among women, but among all of the learners of the Beit Midrash. We understand that she has a backstory here, which we're going to learn more deeply in a moment. She was the daughter of Hanania ben Tradion, who was publicly executed by the Romans. You might know his story from the martyrology that we read on Yom Kippur. And we'll actually look at this story in a moment. And because of the trauma of what happened to her father and also her mother and also her sister, she is a person, that was a formative experience in her life. She becomes this character who desperately hungers for Torah, who is a prodigious learner, who has, we know from the mentions of her throughout the Torah, a kind of artful approach to the interpretation of text, We know she's a person who's deeply sensitive to the human condition. And as one of our scholars say, has a penchant for subtle irony. You'll see this throughout the Beruria stories. There's one that I didn't bring you here, but we might look at one day, where she's very aware that this is a man's world that she's in, and she kind of mocks the rabbis for their insistence that women are not to be trusted and women are not to be spoken to. Don't use excessive words when speaking with a woman. Only say exactly what needs to be said and no more. And she rebukes these men. So she is, in a way, she embodies the role of a prophet, because she's both rebuking and consoling in all of her appearances in the Torah. Now, she's mentioned by name only about 5 times in the Talmud. And she is the only woman in the Talmud who will have halachic principles and traditions that will be referenced to her name. So you know how many times in this session together this year we've talked about all of the halachic traditions cited in Rabbi Yochanan's name, and in Reish Lakish's name, and Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Akiva's name. So this is one of the most brilliant of sages of their time, who could learn 300 halachot from 300 different teachers in one day, and she is the only one to have those traditions cited in her name, and yet she only appears by name 5 times. And she is considered to be a major threat or challenge to the social order of her time, as we will see. And I want to invite you to keep all of that background in mind as we begin to explore the main story for today. So before we go in, any questions so far? Yes, David.
Could you just restate that broad idea? How many men do we study in their name?
Thousands.
And how many women?
About 3. There are about 3 women who there are a couple of other women who are mentioned by name, but most of them are the wife of so-and-so and not actually given their own name. But there's Beruria, Ima Shalom, Yalta. There are a couple of women who are actually mentioned by name, but she's the only one for whom we have halachic traditions taught in her name.
Is it surprising to you that would surprise me?
Yes. Yes, it makes me think when first of all, Mazal Tov to Melissa and Adam, because their daughter Maya just got engaged, and when it was either Maya or Emma, who, when they were very little, I think they went to camp, and the rabbi came to do storytelling, and they said, I didn't even realize that a man could be a rabbi. And so, yes, it surprises me that, David, you're right. I mean, it should be surprising to us. Okay, I'm going to go into the story now. And I will tell you that the major chunk of text that we are looking at today is not the main event. So we're looking at all of this in order to lead us to the main event, which is going to come at the end of this entire story. But it's worth learning it for its own sake anyway. So the text that we're going to be looking at comes from Masechet Avodah Zarah. And it is, we're going to read 18a and 18b today. Okay, so we're going to take a step back on Beruria. I'm on text number 4 now. And, correct, is that 4? Yes. And we're learning Beruria's backstory here. And I mentioned to you that she was the daughter of Hananiah ben Tradion. And so here we will hear what happened to Hananiah ben Tradion. This was, to just locate us in time and space, we are in the land of Israel. It's sometime in the 2nd century. This is when the Romans are publicly attacking public figures who are still engaging in Jewish ritual and Jewish tradition. And so you will see that you'll see how the toll that they forced Rabbi Hananiah ben Tradion to pay. Okay, so at the top, page 4. So what's the reason that Rabbi Hananiah ben Tradion was punished? Because he would pronounce God's name in public, as opposed to in private. So there's some sense that they could engage in Jewish practice in the privacy of their own home, but they were forbidden from engaging in Jewish ritual practice or religious practice in public. But Rabbi Hananiah ben Tradion would very audaciously go into public and still do it. And his wife, Hanania ben Tradion's wife, was also condemned to execution by decapitation because she didn't protest when her husband did so. From this, the rabbis learn anyone who has the capacity to protest against someone else's wrongdoing and does not protest is punished for that person's sin. This is a teaching from the Gemara that we have learned many times together in our community, and usually we learn it in a positive way, that if you are in the San Francisco airport last night and you witness ICE abduct a Latina mother who's traveling with her daughter, demanding that she show her passport even though she's in a domestic terminal and does not need to have a passport in a domestic terminal, and then throwing her to the ground, and you fail to protest, then you are guilty for the crime that they commit. So usually we read this as a positive, that we have an affirmative obligation to intervene on behalf of an innocent, and if we fail to do so, that we ourselves are responsible for it. And here you see the same law being applied differently, which is this wife did not stop her husband from teaching Torah and praying and speaking God's name in public, and so therefore she too will pay the price for it. And why, the text says, was his daughter condemned to sit in a brothel? Why was his daughter forced into sex slavery? As Rabbi Yochanan says, once, so now this is another punishment that we haven't heard of before. So Hanania ben Tradion is killed, and the wife is decapitated, and his daughter is forced into prostitution. As Rabbi Yochanan says, once the daughter was walking in front of the nobles of Rome, and they said to each other, "Look at how pleasant are the steps of this young woman." In other words, they're admiring her, they're objectifying, they are sexualizing this young woman. And when she heard it, says the Gemara, she immediately paid attention and she took care to keep walking in such a way that her steps would continue to be enticing to them. Who wrote this text? Not the woman who's being catcalled on the street, right? Like, she likes it. It's good. She likes the attention. In any case, we don't have the name of the daughter who's sitting in the brothel. We already know that Beruria is named as the daughter of Hanania ben Tradion, so we might think that it's Beruria herself who is sent into the brothel, but the text goes on, text number 5 of what is our 18a still, to say Beruria, the wife of Rabbi Meir, was the daughter of Rabbi Hanania ben Tradion, and she said to him, to Rabbi Meir, "It's disrespectful for me that my sister is sitting in a brothel. You have to do something." So now what we know is that Hanania ben Tradion, the great sage, who was, if you remember, he was wrapped in a Sefer Torah. Is this story familiar to people? It's one of the most horrific of the tale of horrific stories of what we call the martyrs. He was wrapped in a Sefer Torah, and he was burned to death with the scroll. And you might recall, and the letters are ascending, and he said, and the executioner says to him, it's really a kind of like sick and perverse image. And the executioner says to him, if I speed up your death rather than slowing it down, because they had engaged a mechanism to make him suffer more by slowing down the burn. If I speed up your death, can I also get Olam Haba? And Rabbi Hanania ben Tradion says, yes, you'll be granted Olam Haba, the world to come, if you just let me die already. And he dies, and the executioner dies, and a voice comes out saying they both gained access to the world to come. And the rabbis go crazy. They're like, really? Is that fair? The most righteous and also the executioner, he also gets it, but he diminished the suffering for a moment of Rabbi Hanania ben Tradion. In any case, Beruria has experienced this trauma. She's experienced and witnessed the death and the murder of her mother. And now we learn it is her sister who's been taken into sex slavery. And she's married to Rabbi Meir, and she's mortified. And she is in great pain because her sister is suffering the indignities of forced prostitution. And so she cries out to her husband for help. And here Rabbi Meir takes a vessel of dinars, he takes a pile of money, and he goes to find the brothel that is holding his sister-in-law, the sister of his wife. And he's saying to himself as he goes, well, if she hasn't actually transgressed, if she hasn't had sex with any of the guys yet who are coming into this brothel, then there'll be a miracle and she'll be able to be saved. But if she did transgress, there will be no miracle, and she's destined to stay in this house of prostitution. So already here the text is giving us a hint into the thinking of Rabbi Meir. Who does he think is worthy of salvation? Who's worthy of being saved? A woman who, even when she's been sold into sex slavery, is somehow able, I don't even know how he imagines that this might be the case, but is somehow able to fight off her captors and any men who might come into this place to harm her, so that she can protect and preserve her. She comes out of this sexually intact. It's hard to even fathom what he's thinking about here. But we'll soon see. Rabbi Meir then gets dressed up. There's a lot of cosplay happening in this story. So he gets dressed up as a Roman knight, and he goes into the brothel. And he says to her, I want to have sex with you. Accede to my wishes. And she says to him, I can't because I am menstruating. And he says to her, don't worry, I'll wait, right? I will wait until you're done. And then she says to him, there are so many women in this brothel, and there's so many women who are more beautiful than I am. Don't wait for me. Go find another woman. And from this, Rabbi Meir concludes that she is without sin, that somehow she doesn't know that it's Rabbi Meir, but if she was able to resist him, that she probably figured out ways that she could resist other men who were also trying to have sex with her, and so therefore she is innocent and worthy then of being saved. Because had she been having sex with all of these men, presumably he would have left her there because she would be unworthy of being saved. Melissa.
I have a question about miracle. What do they mean by a miracle? Because it seems like he's either going to save her or not.
Right.
A miracle implies some sort of godly intervention.
You will see. Melissa asked, what does it mean a miracle might be performed for her, a miracle will not be performed for her? And you're going to see the role of miracle in the story. Rabbi Meir understands that some Jew from the land of Israel cannot walk into a Roman brothel and buy the freedom of a woman who is being held as a sex slave without a miracle, right? Do you remember when Nick Kristof was traveling around the world and he would go to these brothels and he was helping secure the freedom of some of these girls who had been abducted and were forced into these places? So you can't just walk in. It's not the money alone that will free her. Something miraculous will have to happen. And he seems to be saying, there's a limit to what I can do. If I want to get God on my side for this, she has to prove that she's innocent, but it's his own standard. We don't know that that's God's standard. That's his standard. Okay, so now, yes.
A question from the chat. Did Romans refrain from sex during menstruation?
Oh, well, presumably, because it seems like it worked. It seems like her argument, I am menstruating, was enough to, she wouldn't have used that argument if it hadn't worked to keep these men away from them. So did everybody hear it? I think everybody on the Zoom could hear it. Did Romans refrain from having sex during menstruation? I'm guessing yes, just from this text. Okay, I'll keep going. Text number 7. So Rabbi Meir, having tested her chastity and her innocence, goes over to the guard, to her shomer, the guard at the brothel, and says to him, so give her to me. And the guard says, I can't, because if I give away this sex slave who was brought to me as a punishment for her father's sin, and for, if I give her to you, I will be punished. I'll be complicit in undermining the government, this government's punishment. And so Rabbi Meir says to him, well, take all of these dinarim, take all this cash that I brought, and use half of it and give it to the government as a bribe, and keep the other half for yourself. And here the guard says, okay, but at some point I'm gonna run out of the money, and the bribe won't be enough, and I'll have to keep bribing these guys. They're gonna come back looking for her, and it won't be enough for me to give them a gold coin. I'm gonna run out of gold coins. Then what am I gonna do? And here's, Melissa, where the magic comes in. So Rabbi Meir then says to him, when that happens, when you run out of money, and the government is chasing you down, saying, where is the unnamed daughter of Rabbi Hanania ben Tradion, who we sentenced to sex slavery because her father had the audacity to teach the Jewish religion in public? What will you do? You cry out to God and you say, God of Meir, answer me, and then you'll be saved. And this is where the supernatural intervention comes. And the guard says to him, why would I believe that that's going to work? That sounds insane. So Rabbi Meir says, okay, so watch. I'm going to show you how that's going to work for you. Rabbi Meir then goes out to, there's a pack of carnivorous dogs in this neighborhood. By the way, there were 2 coyotes on my street last night, right here. A pack of, everyone's like, bring your puppies inside. So there's a pack of carnivorous dogs. They're eating humans. And Rabbi Meir goes out and finds these dogs. And like the story that we saw before of the rabbi who picks up a clod of earth and throws it at Rabbi Simlai for being dumb enough to think that he could learn all of this obscure book in a limited period of time, Rabbi Meir goes out and throws a clod of earth at these dogs. And the dogs are alerted to the presence of a delicious-looking man, and so they turn and chase after him to devour him, and that's when he cries out in the sight of this guard, God of Meir, answer me. And when he says that, all of a sudden, these dogs lose interest, and they run away. And when the guard sees this, he gives the daughter of Hanania ben Tradion to Rabbi Meir. He's like, okay, I got the gold and I've got the miracle. I'm going to be okay. So this should be the end of the story. He has secured the release of his wife's sister, and he can bring her, and her dignity is intact, and her chastity is intact, and he can bring her back home now. So at least these 2 sisters who've suffered this terrible trauma of both of their parents being murdered by the authorities, at least they have each other now. But that's not how this story ends. So before we go on, are there any quick questions? Yes?
How is the word sister used here? Because earlier the word brother was used in a more generic fashion.
Yeah.
Is this thought to be the sister-in-law of the rabbi?
Yeah, I think that they are actually sisters. And I think that this is Beruria's actual sister, and Rabbi Meir is the husband of Beruria, so this is his actual sister-in-law. Yeah. Okay, so let's go on. Because the story doesn't end there, eventually the matter was heard in the king's court, and the guard was brought in, and he was taken to be hanged by the court because he released the prisoner of the state. And he was taken to be hanged, pay attention to that, and he cries out, God of Meir, answer me, the same formula that that Meir tells him to do. And when he does that, they lower him down and they can't hang him. And they said to him, like, what are you talking about? What actually happened? We don't know why. It's like this is something supernatural happens that renders them incapable of fulfilling their desire to execute this man. So they're confused, and they say to him what actually happened, and he tells the entire story to them about how this guy came and gave them the money and then said, cry out this formula, the God of Meir, come save me. And so they are livid because now the great Roman Empire has been outsmarted by a Jew who is dressed up as a Roman knight. And so they go and this is like wanted ads. They're going to post images of his face, but it's the ancient times, so they engrave the image of Rabbi Meir's face at the entrance to Rome. Have you ever walked through the, yes. So they say they engraved the image of Rabbi Meir's face at the entrance to Rome, and they said, if anyone sees this man, please, you must bring him here. And one day the Romans saw Rabbi Meir, and they ran after him, and he is running away from them in the market. And where does he go? He goes into a brothel. Now, why would he go into a brothel? Any ideas?
They would not believe that was.
Yeah. Yes. So RBZ says, because if it's really Rabbi Meir, that guy wouldn't go into a brothel. Why? What business would that man have to do in that place, even though now we've seen him in 2 different brothels? Some say that he ran away from them and he saw food that was cooked by Gentiles. He saw pork or something, and so he dipped his pinky finger in the pork soup or whatever it is, and then he licked from the other finger. So he's tricking them because he's not actually eating it, but it looks like he's eating it. And so they're like, oh, that can't be Rabbi Meir, because why would he eat that food? And then there's a third interpretation, which is some say that he escaped the detection because Elijah the prophet himself came and he transformed himself into a prostitute and embraced Rabbi Meir and started kissing him. And so the Roman authorities ran right by him saying, it can't be that guy, okay? So I think this really is the outer edge of the rabbinic imagination. And by the way, there's a lot of sex in the Talmud, but this is you'll see some of the most interesting of it here in the story that we're looking at today. So either he runs into a brothel, I'm sure he didn't do anything in there, but he just ran in, or he dips his finger and then tricks them, or he actually starts making out with Elijah, who must have been looking like a woman, because there's no way he would do that with a man, and either way, it's not Rabbi Meir, so his life is saved. But the story also doesn't end there, and it can, again, end there. He has evaded the Roman authorities. He now can go home, but he doesn't. Instead, if you look at text 8, and we're now in Avodah Zarah 18b, instead, he gets up and he flees from Eretz Yisrael, from the land of Israel, and he goes to Babel. He goes to Babylonia. Okay, so now he has the great sage, Rabbi Meir, has left everything. His wife, his community, his school, his students. He has left everything and fled to Babylonia. And so the rabbis need to understand why would he flee? And this sugya ends with the following. It says, okay, Ata leVabel, Ika da'amri, there are those who say, Mehai ma'aseh, ve'ika da'amri mima'aseh Beruria. Very, very simple, just a couple of words. There are those who say it was from this incident, and there are those who say it was from the Beruria incident. Okay, if it's from this incident that we just read about, so why did Rabbi Meir flee? There are a couple of good answers here. So why do you think Rabbi Meir would flee to Babylonia, leave behind everything, if it was from the incident we just read about? Yes, Stuart. Okay, because he was able to evade the authorities this time, but who knows? Everybody knows his face now. And it could be that, tomorrow he goes out and somebody comes after him and they actually succeed this time. Okay, so that's possible. He's still in danger because the Roman authorities are hell-bent on getting him and making him pay the price. Any other reason why Rabbi Meir might have fled to Babylonia after this incident? Yes.
Well, he's gone into a brothel. He's dipped his...
Two brothels, right? Yeah.
He's dipped his finger in pig feet, trafe. He's done things. He's embarrassed himself.
Yeah, okay, this is great. So one possibility is he's still in danger. The other is that it's not just the Roman authorities who saw a guy who looks a lot like Rabbi Meir, who's making out with Elijah, dipping his finger in pork stew and going into two brothels, but maybe some of the Jews in the neighborhood saw it too, or he's afraid that they did, and he feels ashamed or scared, and he just needs a fresh start. He has to get out of there because he's lost his authority because of what he needed to do in order to stay alive. And so he wants to leave. That's great. Thank you, Marshall. Any other? Yes, David.
I don't know, but the story starts with his wife. His wife sets this off.
Yes, and so what do you think that means?
I don't know.
Okay.
But I'm gonna guess that there's a connection.
Yes, there is. You know how like in the rules of screenwriting, you never show a gun unless you're going to use it? So, okay, so there's a reason why this story starts with Beruria and ends with Beruria. Yes, Eitan.
I mean, his reputation's tarnished for sure, but also he probably doesn't feel safe there himself.
Okay, so it's not just what others, you're meaning that because he's afraid that the authorities might come after him still, or?
So it seems to be an unholy place for him to live. I mean, he got himself involved.
Okay, so he doesn't see his future in this place. It seems like both an unholy place, maybe, I'm just going to throw it out there, now having visited multiple brothels and made out with a prophet and tasted treif, maybe he can't go back into the Beit Midrash himself, not because they won't take him, but because he's had a taste of the, of the other side. And he doesn't, and that life doesn't resonate for him in the same way anymore. Okay, so there are a lot of possibilities of why he would flee because of this incident. But let's now go to the second IKAR. There are those who say, which is Mimase de Beruria, because of the incident with Beruria, period. That's the end of the sugya. So we don't know what the incident with Beruria is. We don't know for several hundred years after this text is written what the incident with Beruria could be. There's no indication in the Gemara of what might have happened here. So now you can guess. I think David Hirsch would say, well, this story started with Beruria and ends with Beruria. So there was some rift created in the relationship with Rabbi Meir and his wife Beruria that when he went out on this mission, he did something to harm their marriage. And we could imagine a story, as I guess the rabbis might have for several hundred years, because they must have looked at this and said, what incident? And maybe they imagined that he went home very proudly and said, I got your sister free. And she said, how'd you do it? And he said, well, I propositioned her for sex. And then I tried and tried again. And each time she said no. And she said, you propositioned my sister for sex? That's not what I asked you to do. I mean, we just don't know. Until Rashi comes along and tells us what he thinks happened. Are we ready? And this, friends, is the key to today's session. Okay, this is Rashi's interpretation of that final line of our text. And some say, V'ika de amre mishum ma'aseh de Beruria. It was because of the incident with Beruria. As one time, Beruria mocked the sages in Kiddushin when they said that women are lightheaded, nashim datan kalot, that they do not have the mental capacity to hold a lot of information because they are lightheaded and susceptible to seduction or likely to seduce or both. And therefore, as Rabbi Eliezer says in Sota, teaching women Torah is like teaching them how to have sex. And so she hears, that's the ecosystem in which Beruria lives. She hears the rabbi say these words, and she mocks him for saying it. And Rabbi Meir says, and the Sefaria translation includes in brackets, to himself, although it's not necessarily to himself. He either says this out loud or to himself. By your life, in the end, you will concede to their words, meaning you dare to mock the rabbis for mocking you. In the end, we will prove that the rabbis are right, that women are lightheaded and able to be seduced and cannot be trusted with the important work of advancing our Jewish tradition, particularly in this time of so much crisis, when we're being persecuted for even teaching our faith. And so what does Rabbi Meir do in order to prove that Beruria is wrong to criticize the rabbis for saying that she herself and other women couldn't handle it? So he commands one of his students to test her by sinning with her. Now, the student goes before her and pleads with her for many days to have sex with him until she finally agrees. And then she finds out that it was all a test that her husband, the great Rabbi Meir, had created in order to prove that the rabbis were right, that women are lightheaded seductresses. And she finds this out and she hangs herself. She dies by suicide. And when that happens, Rabbi Meir runs away to Babylonia due to the shame of what has transpired.
The shame of her suicide or the shame of the whole thing?
Well, that's a good question that Rashi doesn't answer, but we can. So the shame of having put his wife through a test, which you are not supposed to do. I put here the pasuk from Leviticus that says, "Lifnei iver lo titein michshol," that we are not allowed to put a stumbling block before the blind. We're not allowed to test someone's faith or their loyalty. There is an incredible tshuva. There are a number of tshuvot that are written that basically show, like, is it, if you're able to determine that someone's not trustworthy based only on the fact that you test them and you're able to prove it, does it even count? Because they shouldn't have been tested in the first place. So she should not have been tested here. But she was. And then she dies by suicide, and it seems the shame of it is what drives him away.
Couldn't it also be just the shame that his wife transgressed?
It could also be, yeah. It could be the shame that she actually fell for this thing and went to the student. I want to just suggest here, I'm just going to recommend Ruth Calderon's book, A Bride for One Night, in which she tells a number of Talmudic stories, including this little piece, which actually isn't in the Talmud, but is the Rashi gloss on a Talmud. And she tells them really from the vantage point of the women who are impacted by these stories. And so she tells the story of the student who is asked by his beloved teacher to go seduce the great Beruria, the most brilliant mind of her generation. And he's first a loyal student to Rabbi Meir, but he also kind of is falling in love with Beruria because she's incredible. And Rabbi Meir is basically saying to him, go to my wife, see if she'll have sex with you. You have my permission. And Beruria, in the version that Ruth Calderon tells, is so demeaned by the environment that she's in, including by her husband, who she doesn't know has put the student up to this test, but who you can see his reaction, by your life you will concede to these words. At least in some part of the rabbinic imagination, Rabbi Meir himself is extremely threatened by his wife, and clearly the other rabbis are as well. And here's this student who becomes her chavruta, and they start to learn together, and he cares about her interpretations, and he's interested in her, whereas the men try to silence her, try to marginalize her. And here's this one brilliant young guy who just wants to honor her, and how seductive that is to her. like, in other words, Calderon is suggesting, I think, that it's not the sex, it's the attention that she was starved for. And eventually he's able to sleep with her. He tricks her into, basically tricks her into having sex with him. And then when she discovers that it was all a setup, that's when she takes her own life. I will also add here just one more piece of data for us, that the punishment for adultery is strangulation, is death by strangulation, and she does hang herself here. And so some of the rabbis suggest that she, in dying by suicide, is actually fulfilling what she knows is the appropriate religious response to the sin that she has committed. I want to ask you what your take is on this, and I'm gonna, in particular, I want to invite you to think about the two sisters, not just about Beruria, but also to think about Beruria's unnamed sister, in light of both of these tales. So, Lisa.
So much of the story is all this fear and projection about how women are bad, and yet there's a lot of mood setting around that. And then in terms of the actual events, women end up in a brothel, women end up being shamed on the street, and then there is this transgression perhaps that comes centuries later. So it's really backwards and disgusting.
It's really painful to see it. It's deep.
Women take a lot of shit, right?
Yes, women take a lot of shit. Yes, no, I think you're right. It's really painful to see, because what we know about her is her fierce commitment to Torah, her incredible mind, and her agility, and her deep humanity. And it seems like the story is saying, beware women who have an interest in entering this space. This is what will happen to you in the end. And it's not just that she dies. Like, her mother died in a horrible, gruesome way because her mother supported her father in being a religious leader. It's that they put the sin, the transgression on her. In other words, the story is told such that it's her own weakness that ends up killing her. And so I think we have to ask the question of where the story comes from and why the story is told and retold. Why does the Beruria incident loom so large in the rabbinic imagination? Because it is not there. It's not in the Talmud. And yet it's a very well-known story that seems to be born of Rashi's commentary.
I'm curious about just like, if it's a sin to try to trick somebody, and that's what Rabbi Meir did to his wife.
Yes.
Is he punished?
Okay, so is Rabbi Meir punished for tricking his wife, deceiving his wife, which you're not supposed to do? And here I just want to say, he doesn't only deceive his wife. Who else does he deceive? The student, okay. His sister-in-law, right? He does there's the parallels to these two stories are really interesting. Rabbi Meir is deceiving these two women, the daughters of the great Hananiah ben Teradion. By the way, we're not certain if this is a historical reality, if they actually were the two daughters of Hananiah ben Teradion. And Gila Fine writes, she writes that this is literature, not history. So we don't know, actually. But the rabbis wanted to position it that the great Hananiah ben Teradion had two daughters, and at least one of them inherited his affinity for text and tradition, and both of them suffered terribly. One of them, though, survives, and one of them dies. And which one dies? The one who takes Torah most seriously. And what happens to the other one? She wants to look good for the Roman authorities. So it's essentially saying, looking good for the Roman authorities, you'll suffer at the hands of the Romans, like women paying too much attention to how they look and to the aesthetic. They will suffer, but they're not going to suffer the way the women who hit the books are going to suffer. right? And in both of those cases, I'm going to come to you in 1 second, Rabbi Panitz. In both of those cases, Rabbi Meir creates a test in order to determine the chastity of the women who he's engaging, the sister and his wife herself. Rabbi Panitz.
Well, so I agree that there's the woman who knows Torah is the one who's ultimately punished, and yet Beruria's sister is the one who actually upends the rabbinic dictum about women being lightheaded, because the sister is the one who is not seducted, right? What's the word?
Seduced.
Seduced. Right? Who resists seduction and does so in a way which is actually Torah-based. I'm menstruating.
Right.
There's something undermining about the sister's behavior vis-a-vis the rabbinic dictum.
Right, and it's almost like women should know enough to not have sex during menstruation, but not so much that they end up being a threat to the male rabbinic authority, right? I mean, the sister is honoring her own. She's doing the best she can to honor her integrity, and also there's a difference between the two sisters. One of them is deeply enmeshed in Torah, and one of them is a Jewish woman who understands the basic parameters of how to be a Jewish woman, but is not threatening the men of her community.
Right, but it proves the rabbinic dictum a lie. The sister's behavior proves that women are not necessarily
easy to seduce. Yeah. Okay, that's great. So it's actually not Beruria, but the sister who ends up proving that women are not easily seduced. They're so lightheaded, and that they can be taken by any attractive man in a Roman knight costume. So, okay, thank you. Yes, David.
When I woke up this morning, the moon had set, the sun had risen. I thought it was going to be a wonderful day, and this is so painful. This is not an academic, mythic study, and it's so difficult to read. And I don't think it's a surprise, but I'd just like to acknowledge your teaching on Shabbos and the interconnection between this study and your drash on Saturday. It makes it very, very painful.
Thank you, David. Don't leave early. I mean, you're right. We have to sometimes dive deeply into some of the really hard things in order to reckon honestly with the tradition, and that is the reason why I wanted to bring it this week also. Because what we see in Beruria is that the women who are the greatest threats to these men are the women who are able to play in their field. And that makes her somebody who the rabbis, at all costs, Rabbi Meir is willing to undermine, and that's extremely painful. And actually, one of the things, I think one of the messages of the story is that there is no room for women in this world. I don't mean the world of Jews. I mean the world of the Beit Midrash, the world of leadership, of real religious leadership, and the whole world will explode rather than make room for this woman. Right, we'll let the whole world be blown up, and here's let me just take you into two potential moral messages here, both of which I think are really important and relevant. And here I want to say, by the way, Noam Tzion wrote an entire book on Beruria. Beruria and Rabbi Meir, the odd couple. And there are so many aspects to this, and it was, as I said, it was very hard to limit what we were going to look at today. But I want to suggest that I want to just bring us two possible moral messages from this story, and then we're going to look very quickly at both Boyarin and Tova Hartman's take on this. Actually, let me do that. Let's do that first. If you look at Daniel Boyarin from Carnal Israel, he writes, "My theory is that Beruria's story is generated as the dark double of the story of her sister out of the matrix of the Babylonian understanding of Rabbi Eliezer. Namely, that there is, Rabbi Eliezer is the one who said it's tiflut, teaching women Torah is teaching them licentiousness. Namely, that there is an essential nexus between a woman studying Torah and the breakdown of the structure of monogamy, that a wife like Beruria could not possibly end up beloved and befriended by her husband, and that a husband like Rabbi Meir, who would love and befriend such a woman, must himself end up in exile. Taken together, the story of the two sisters forms one exemplum, one paradigm case that illustrates Rabbi Eliezer's dictum as it was understood and experienced in the Babylonian Talmud's cultural field, a demonstration that there is an intrinsic and necessary connection between a scholarly woman and uncontrolled sexuality. Okay? So one of the questions that I keep asking, and we're going to have to address before we close is, so why is this story being told? Why does Rashi bring this story? If the message of this story is that there is an intrinsic and necessary connection between a woman who advances in that field, a woman leader in the public space of Jewish faith, and uncontrolled sexuality, what could be a greater threat to the order than, a woman who has control, who has her own sense of who she should have sex with, and isn't only going to kind of be humbled by what the society tells her. So why is that story being told, and why is it being told then? Look at Tova Hartman. Text number 12. The story of Beruria and her husband can be taught as a voice in the tradition that poses a deep criticism of men in general, and Rabbi Meir in particular. Men's cruelty in reaffirming their exclusivity brings about death. Men's cruelty in reaffirming their exclusivity brings about death. It teaches us how threatened men were in the face of real competition. David, to your point about the timing of this shiur today, how threatened men were in the face of real competition to their male hegemony and to what extremes they were willing to go to uphold this hegemony. Did you see the article on Thursday or Friday about Dolores Huerta, who getting ready for the press conference where they're going to honor that she was able to pass this legislation, and she gets a call that there's an urgent meeting in Florida that she needs to go to, and she flies to Florida, but there's nothing happening there? They just didn't want her to be the face of the movement, to be the face of the press conference. They're so threatened by her leadership. The story of Beruria criticizes a man who feels so threatened by a woman's knowledge that he will push her to suicide and make his student transgress a halacha that is just as much punishable by death. It's like you can't have sex with your teacher's wife just because he says it's okay. It's not okay, right? Simply to preserve male exclusivity. Rabbi Meir's zealousness fails to maintain his world order and was displaced by his cruel effort to affirm his place. This reading is a message to men to allow women's voices to strengthen and to surface. The attempt to silence them will lead to the silencing of voices altogether, and men as well must then be silenced. And so I'm going to suggest a couple of things as we get ready to close here. Number one, that when Rashi brought this, and some scholars say, by the way, it wasn't even Rashi, that later scholars brought it and claimed it for Rashi, because then it would have legitimacy to it. It was brought into the discourse and then later used in the discourse by a number of poskim, of halachic decisors, as a justification for keeping women out of the Beit Midrash and out of leadership. It was this text, this little comment by Rashi of a made-up story was used as an excuse to keep women out of leadership. And there are two moral messages that one could draw from it. So one, I think there are more than two actually, but the two key ones are, one, the moral message which was intended either by Rashi or by whomever put this in Rashi's name, and then by the many rabbis in the generations after who used this story, advanced the story, taught this story to their male students so that they would whisper the story to their wives as a warning of stay out of the Beit Midrash, a warning to future generations. Women are lightheaded, unreliable, susceptible to licentiousness, so don't know your place, don't be too strong, don't be too confident, and do not enter the man's sphere, right? You understand where you must stay in order to uphold this structure. Do not trust yourself because you are no Beruria. And if Beruria could not resist the temptation of the students of Rabbi Meir, there's no way you can. And I also want to suggest that there's a second way of reading this, which is it's not just a warning to the women, but it is also a warning to the men. And where did I just put the page? And that the second lesson is actually saying, when we don't create the space in which women are welcomed and treated as vessels for the holy, the whole world collapses. That kicking Beruria out of the Beit Midrash, shaming her to death, not only kills one of the great sages of our time, but forces the other to flee. Meaning, as I said before, we're trying to circumscribe this world to such an extent that we'd rather have the whole world implode than actually stretch to make it accommodate more voices, more people, more scholarship. And I think that that's a really important warning for us. If we fail to stretch the boundaries of our spaces, our inability to make space for the people who need to be welcomed into this space actually endangers the very space itself. So what you're doing, it's paradoxical, because what you're doing is trying to protect the space. And what you end up doing is endangering the space itself. So one of my greatest teachers, who was one of the most brilliant teachers of Talmud of his time, a Holocaust survivor who memorized the entire Talmud, every single word, by the time he became bar mitzvah. He was actually, he survived, fled, came to New York, was teaching at the seminary, and he was one of my teachers in college, and I told him I wanted to go to seminary to study to become a rabbi, and he had left the seminary over the decision to ordain women as rabbis, and I asked him why, and he said, we need to protect the space. He said, it's not that I oppose women. I'm happy to teach women in my secular studies classes, at Columbia, but we can't have women ordained as rabbis because we have to protect the structure. And I think what we're seeing here is the moral message of this is you are protecting the structure at the expense of the structure, at the expense of the entire system. And if we don't allow for the kind of transformation of our concept of leadership that needs to happen, then we end up jeopardizing the whole movement. And if you think about what's happening even just in the last week from the revelations about Chavez, the danger that this story poses now to the UFW and to the farm workers who desperately need our support. But how many people are walking away or will walk away from the movement altogether because they have a fallen hero? Whereas expanding the concept of leadership would ultimately only have strengthened the system itself in so many ways. So I want to leave us with that and the hope that these teachings can be seen not only as a kind of clear testimony to the fact that the patriarchy is real and very, very old and very rooted, but also that there's a hint in these stories, because of how just very egregious this story is, there's also a hint of a critique of that same patriarchal system that is embedded in the text itself, because you really can't read it and not be horrified. It's so terrible, and it's so obviously terrible that it seems to be teaching us just be careful. Be careful who you include and who you exclude, because this entire system is more fragile than we think. And on that note, I'm sorry, but we have to end. And I know that there are a couple comments. I'll stay for a couple minutes after, but let us close with Kaddish de Rabbanan, with our Kaddish. Is anybody saying Kaddish today? Okay. Yitzgadal v'yikadash shemei rabbah. V'yalmad yirach eretei v'yamlich malchutei b'chayachonu v'yamachonu v'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael b'galat v'zman kariv v'imru. Amen. Yehei shmei rabbah mevarach le'olam u'me'omaya. Yitzbarach v'yishtabach v'yitzpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei d'kudsha b'rechu le'ilam mikol berchata v'shirata tishbechata v'nechamata da'amiran b'amat v'imru. Amen. Al Yisrael v'al Rabbanan v'al Talmidehon v'al kol Talmidei Talmidehon v'al kol man da'askim b'oraita diva atar hadem v'div b'chol atar v'atar. Yehei lahon u'lchon shlama rabbachina v'chista v'rachamin v'chayin arichin v'zonei v'vichei u'vorkana min kadam v'odi v'shmaya v'imru. Amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Osei shalom b'ramav hu ya'asei shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Thank you, everybody. I feel like we should take a big breath together.